Good evening, shalom to our listeners, to our viewers. We are on every major social media networks, and it's my distinct pleasure and privilege to welcome today Danielle Sobkin, who is one of the most outspoken Jewish student leaders on UC Berkeley campus today. I believe there's a group called Bears for Israel. I didn't put it in the title, Danielle, because very few people, would be quite confused. Those who didn't go to Cal would be quite confused. Bears, Israel, because we have all kinds of groups now for Israel or for Palestine. But Bears is a mascot of, I believe, of a football team, right, at UC Berkeley, a very famous team. So Bears for Israel. Danielle is a co-president of that group, of a very active group. And of course, what's on everyone's mind right now immediately is the aftermath. Exactly a week from today, last Tuesday, there was a major pogrom. There's no other word to use it. But allow me, we'll listen to you in the details, but we have a little video, about a minute, that I want to show everyone, which, every picture is worth 1,000 words. And then, of course, we'll go into the details, and we'll be very happy to hear from you what happened then, what continues to happen on campus, and most importantly, because our community has an ex-Soviet background, we always detailed and action-oriented. We also want to know if there's something we can do and support you guys, support the students, support the Jewish students, and to do something about what's going on in Israel. But first, I would like to show everyone what actually has transpired last.
Chief of Police Yogananda Pittman, we are asking all persons to leave.
Okay, we're gonna go that way. Excuse me, friends. Here. Okay, we're gonna go this way.
And that's just a little bit.
All right. So Danielle, we
Well,
are
tonight
back.
there's a state of emergency in effect around.
Yeah, it's so we're bringing you back, and this is again the 1 minute recap of what happened that is shot by you and some other students on campus. So if you don't mind, we just because there's a lot of confusion. The news is circulating. If you can, we'll spend a couple of minutes of walking us back what exactly happened. So number one, there's the speaker, a very known speaker that speaks about Israel, who actually just finished serving in the Army Reserve, and you brought him, your group and other Jewish groups has brought him on campus. Where is that an original venue where the speaker Ran Bar Yehoshaphat, where is that taking place? That's on campus, right? It was provided to you by UC Berkeley. Is that correct?
Yeah. So just backing up, first of all, thank you so much for having me. And thank you for everyone who's interested in listening and hearing about this. I think it's really important for the general public to understand what really went down and just to get a better, broader understanding. So originally the venue was scheduled for Wheeler 204, which is on main campus. It's, a classroom, a lecture building. And on Sunday, the event was exactly a week ago. So on Sunday, a group called Bears for Palestine posted on their Instagram a campus-wide shutdown calling for, the end of our event and for everyone to kind of come out in masses and shut it down. Obviously, we've seen physical violence from this group before, and we've had 2 physical assaults of Jewish students earlier this year. So we took that call very seriously. We sent emails to administration, and Monday morning we met with administration, different faculty, UCPD, etc., to understand what can we do. Should we relocate? Can we have, additional protection, whether that's UCPD or some sort of other system? We were able to be relocated, which is where we had this event, which is at Zellerbach Playhouse. And unfortunately, the location was later found out, which is, leading up to what you guys saw in the images and the videos in the video.
So, how many people have come to listen to this speaker? And again, the speaker is not necessarily pro-Israel, or it was built about, he would come and speak about what's going on in Israel right now. What would what would be the rules of warfare under international law? Something which is pretty much fits the agenda of education, where you can, that's the whole point of going to college, that you can get a very first-hand information and be informed and educated about what's going on. How many people signed up to listen to the speaker from Israel?
We had around 50 RSVPs, although RSVPs escalated after this post went out Sunday night from this group. So then we were trying to understand who is a genuine RSVP and who's just coming to sort of protest.
Who's coming to disrupt? Yeah.
Exactly. So the original number was around 50, and that's what this room in Wheeler 204 was to accommodate. So around 50 people, which is a great turnout for an educational event, and the keyword being educational. Ron Varus was to speak about international law and his perspectives. Yes, he's a reservist. Yes, he just came out of, his service, but the entire purpose was education. And we have so much pro-Palestinian noise on campus, and for us to not even be able to host one educational event regarding, not even the pure Israeli perspective, but just about international law, to not even be able to have that educational opportunity, I think is just absolutely absurd and shows the lack of even willingness on campus. And I think it's outrageous.
Okay, so is Students for Justice in Palestine, is it still a legal group at UC Berkeley? Because I know some campuses are outlawing that group. So as SJP, is it still active on campus, or Bears for Palestine now has taken over the pro-Palestinian agenda?
So we don't have an official SJP, but BFP, Bears for Palestine, essentially is our SJP on campus.
Right. So they call for boycott. They call everyone to come out. And we saw there were, I believe, so 50 speakers are trying to get into the Zellerbach Hall, and there's about 200 people, if I understand. And correct me, there are various media reports, and there's about 200 people outside of the hall protesting, calling for intifada. For those who don't understand, that word means very violent, uprising. This is not a protest. When you scream intifada means that you want to take arms or whatever you have and violently go and make your point across. So students are trying to get in. The police, you use UCPD, but we need to translate for our viewers that it's a UC Berkeley Police Department. So the campus has its own police department, his own police officers. So they're there to maintain control, so it'll be peaceful and so on. So was it hard to get into the building as people are trying to get in to hear the speaker?
Yeah, so two perspectives. I can first share my perspective, and then also those that, I've talked to that have been trying to get in. I was actually on my way to the event, and I wasn't even able to get there before I was getting phone calls, before I was getting text messages, floods of messages. At first it was, they found the new location, they're coming, there's a huge mass of students. So just to articulate, this group knew that our original venue was Wheeler 204. So the event was supposed to start at 6:30. At around 5, there was already protesters outside Wheeler. By about 6:10, they found the new location, had migrated. This was about the time where I left my house to go to the event, and I had to turn around. I had to go home because I was getting calls that it's not safe. I was getting live updates on what was going on, the fact that students were evacuated, a window was broken. There was, a huge, massive, what do we do now? And me, as a co-president of one of these organizers, what do I do for my community as somebody's supposed to be there on the ground right there next to everyone, and, people that aren't even student leaders, people that just wanted to come and listen, genuinely learn from this event. And from the perspective of students that were there and trying to get in, it was impossible. I mean, how can you get in when you're surrounded and engulfed by a mass of 200 mobbing protesters? And the key distinction is they were no longer protesters at this point. They were rioters. And those images and videos that you saw, they were literally banging on the windows and on the doors, shoving UCPD, these police guards, to get in. And it became so physical so fast. It was impossible for students that even wanted to, that were on the outskirts, to get in. And this is actually how one of the physical assaults happened, which, if you've been following the issue, there was an individual, a freshman, who was pulled into this mass and actually choked. And yeah, I mean, a really difficult situation, and nobody could get in.
So nobody can get in. The so-called protesters, rioters. You're absolutely right. There's no more freedom of speech once you get into physical contact with someone else. So the rioters, they broke the window of the Zellerbar Hall. It's a college property. It's a university property. One of the students got stuck into that mob and was choked. I read reports. There were people that were called names. There were people who were spat at, and insulted. Called you Jews, anything as far as verbal abuse. So it's all of the above. Is that correct?
Yeah, kind of hit every single check mark of what could have happened.
Of the scariest experience possible. Now,
Yeah.
is this something how long you've been? 2 years you've been on UC Berkeley campus.
I'm now a
Right?
junior, third year. So it's my third
Third
year on
year.
campus, but I'm graduating this spring.
Have you ever seen such a level of violence as happened last Tuesday?
Not on UC Berkeley's campus. I think we saw what happened previously this year at Tulane and other campuses that had, physical assaults, pretty intense situations. But at Berkeley, and in my experience here, this was, the worst that I've ever seen it. And I wasn't even there at the event.
I understand. So and I remember, so once this whole thing breaks out, we saw on the short video, that whoever was in charge from the police, from the campus police, comes in and says, we cannot guarantee your safety anymore.
Yeah.
And just like it's in the 1930s and the 40s and the scariest of times of our recent Jewish history, you have to take a tunnel and go to another location, or the event was canceled. Everyone was escorted to safety.
So the students inside the building were escorted outside. And actually, what a lot of people don't know is that the event was continued. It was able to happen at Chabad. So a huge thank you to Berkeley Chabad for making the event still possible and for people to come out and learn despite it. And I think it also shows the resilience of the community. Despite what happened, students came and they went and they listened. And I think that really is a true testament to the community here. But overall, the major event on main campus was shut down.
I understand. So again, it's very secretly through the tunnels, through going through downstairs. The students are leaving. Those who came to listen to the Israeli speaker moved out to Chabad Jewish Center for Jewish Students. It's all located very close to the campus, literally like on the borderline. Rabbi Gilitz gets our allocates for supporting the Jewish students of Chabad of UC Berkeley, and the event actually continued, which is again only we can only admire the courage and commitment and determination of the Jewish students. So October 7th, the horrific events that happening in Israel, Simchat Torah, one of the joyous, happiest Jewish holidays, which forever going to be in the modern Israeli history and the history of Jewish people, would have a different connotations to it. So, and UC Berkeley becomes a hotbed of very, very extreme and very aggressive, pro-Palestinian, for the lack of the better word, activity. Would that be a correct assessment? Or there's something that's always been going on, or is it really gone on steroids after October 7th?
I mean, listen, coming from the East Coast, I had heard, things about UC Berkeley being anti-Semitic, or a school that isn't necessarily too outwardly supportive of Zionist students. And that's been true for my 3 years on campus. There's been anti-Zionist rhetoric and sentiment, and it's been hard to be an active Zionist voice on campus and a pro-Israel voice on campus. But I do think since October 7th, things have escalated to a point where it's scary. Like now it's genuinely scary. Like as a student leader, people know my face. I've been on national news. I've been in national coverage and very outspoken about this. And it's come to a point where it's genuinely scary. And I think, in the past 3 years, yes, there's been incidents here and there, but October 7th, I think just blasted anti-Semitism to not only a new level, but a normalized level.
So so obviously on everyone's mind, we are the immigrants from a former Soviet Union. We came to this country to give our children a better life. We face anti-Semitism. We'll talk about your background a little bit later in our program. So, but even any regular American would automatically think, wait a second, this is not supposed to be happening. So how is being what been response of the UC Berkeley is a huge institution, over close to 30,000 students. It's one of the major, known schools in the country and around the world. How has been the university's administration? What was been their response? What was their actions?
For lack of a better word, I mean, terrible. Even acknowledging what happened, the atrocities that happened on October 7th, it took nearly a week, I believe, for the school to even send out, a communication condemning what happened. And even then, it was, pretty terrible. It was not supportive or meaningful in any sense. And I think the entire Jewish community was let down by that message. I was let down by that message, and I'm continuously let down. At this point, my go-to saying is, "I'm disappointed but not surprised."
Mhm.
And that's kind of been the sentiment overall. The administration is not supportive. They're not receptive. There's a lot of talk, but there's not a lot of action. And at this point, I think Jewish leaders are tired of talking. We're tired of saying we don't feel safe on campus. We don't feel supported. We don't feel heard. And there's no action. And I don't know how many more times, how many more physical assaults, and in general, what else needs to happen? I don't understand what else needs to happen for the school and the administration to finally put their foot down, to finally act on their words, to ban student groups that are outwardly and evidently breaking like school codes. They're breaking policies. They're breaking the rules of RSOs, registered student organizations. What else will it take for students that are being physically violent against other students to face the consequences that they should, like any other student? And the biggest question is, and the question that I think we so often come back to, is that if it was any other student of any other group, minority group, would have action already taken place? And I think the unfortunate answer we know is, yeah, it would have taken place a long time ago. So the question that, me and other student leaders continuously come back to is, why does the safety of Jewish students not matter? What will it take for our safety to matter? And how much longer do we have to wait?
I understand. I understand also. Is it correct understanding that you've met with Chancellor, or either on the phone or in person, you and a couple students? If you can tell us a little bit about that. I mean, Berkeley is always in the news. It's always in the news when it comes to what you just described of Jews felt marginalized and not paying attention to, and I will talk in a second. Also want to hear if it's also coming from the professorship, from the educators on campus. But obviously the February 26th, this is going to be, we have October 7th, and now when it comes to UC Berkeley, there's February 26th. There's that day of things of crossing the Rubicon, so to speak. So you met with the chancellor. If you can tell us a little bit about that meeting.
So for finally, before Shabbat last week, there was a small group of, active student leaders that met with the chancellor finally, which this was the first meeting this entire year, despite many, many emails to her, that she sat down with a group of students, and it was a receptive meeting. And we actually got quite a positive email early Monday morning. I'm not sure if you saw it, but it was,
Yes, I do.
fairly well written email. I was, surprised. It called out anti-Semitism. It called out what happened. But a few hours later, there was another email that came out, which essentially undid everything that first email said. And at that point, you're taking 2 steps forward and 10 steps back. And that was a huge letdown. And I think that was also, another stab in the chest of like, okay, so you did something good for the community. We heard you, we saw you, and it was, we really respected what you did to finally stand up for us. And then you sent another email. And at that point, we're looking at that first email and we're like, well, what happened? It took a few hours for you to take back everything that you said. So confused on what's going on there. And
So logically, I would imagine that the first email comes out where, for the first time ever, UC Berkeley administration chancellor calls out anti-Semitism by its name, unequivocally condemning the violence, making sure, promising that the Jewish students are going to be safe on campus. And then, I mean, logically, you can imagine there's probably some kind of a backlash to the email. And then 2 hours later, another email, watered down email, undoing, kind of walking back, as the term says. So you mentioned a few actions. You mentioned that student groups that are violating school code, and because a lot of people perceiving this, that that, oh, university cannot take sides. No one is asking university, if I understand you correctly, is taking any sides in any international dispute or anything else. There's right now 10 armed conflicts that are taking place right now as we speak, somewhere in the world. So, but there are school policies, there are school codes, there are people, when you go to become a student in UC Berkeley, you sign a contract how you're supposed to behave, and the student groups also sign the contracts how they have to behave, when they do their public events and so on and so on. So there are specific steps, as I understand, that you have asked UC Berkeley to take. If you can tell us a few, tell us a little bit more about those steps that you've asked Chancellor, and everyone, whoever else you're in contact to take. You meaning the Jewish student community.
Right. And I don't think those are even asks. We're just asking for follow through. Like you said, there are student codes that student signs whenever they become a student at a university. And those codes of conduct are not being followed through. And I think what you said, which is so important, is nobody's asking if, for somebody to take sides. Jewish hate is not political. Jewish hate is not something that we debate. Jewish hate is unacceptable. And so what will it take is that was our biggest question. What will it take for the school to follow through on its own code of conduct, for its own rules that it insisted on, kind of telling students themselves? And so the biggest thing that we ask is for the school to identify and call out Jewish hate and anti-Semitism that leads to hate crimes or whatever else might be, for the school to put their foot down and be able to call it out, not wishy-washy, not muddled, not, watered down, but to concretely call out Jewish hate. And second of all, like you said, is to follow through on their own policies, on policies against hate speech and hate crimes and violence, whatever it might be, is to actually follow through on those consequences. And for students to really receive, what if they violated a school policy, they should receive the appropriate consequence, whether that's expulsion, whether that's, whatever it might be. There's rules and there's consequences, and they need to be followed through.
Danielle, thank you. I want to show if we're going to pause for another minute, because everyone knows, in the circles that is in our community, has been renamed. The Berkeley has been renamed UC Palestine. That's how official has been renamed. But what I know, and that this is. Let's do two-pronged. Question number one: what do you think makes your campus so indifferent to anti-Jewish violence, to stress those Jewish safety, to violations of free speech, and so on? And I know it's a subjective opinion. We're not asking you for a legal opinion, but a subjective opinion. What do you think? Why UC Berkeley has been that place for 3 years? You're never surprised that the administration does not respond to the needs of the Jewish students.
Yeah, and I think this is something that kind of came to me as a culture shock whenever I first moved to the Bay and Berkeley specifically, is that there are issues that you have to be right and wrong about in order to be, a morally good person. Or there are these litmus tests, and anti-Semitism, or, being an anti-Zionist is one of those litmus tests. Are you on the right side of the issue? Or are you on the wrong side of the issue? And being anti-Zionist falls on the right side of the spectrum. Like, you should be against the state of Israel, and that's a check mark on your box. And there's also this deep-seated normalization of Jewish hate that's been pretty prominent, whether that's stemming back, to the fact that SJP originated on UC Berkeley's campus, and the fact that this kind of Jewish hate has been promulgated not only on the campus, but also through classroom education. So I think those are the two big issues. And also just, the political nature of the area, I think, is also a big factor that kind of plays into this need of having to fit into a mold, having to be politically right on an issue. And one of those things is, unfortunately, where do you stand on the IP conflict, on the Israel-Palestine conflict? And that came as a big shock whenever I moved here. Growing up in Pittsburgh, that never was really debated, especially in my Jewish circles. It was never a question of, are you a Zionist or are you an anti-Zionist? And every single person I was around and grew up, there was never this question. So it was a big shock whenever I moved here.
Okay, so I hear you. It's ideological. It's politically correct. It's politically right. It's politically important to be anti-Israel. To be or is the term the more politically correct term anti-Zionism, which pretty much we understand is the same thing. Which we see very clearly how anti-Zionism is which been predicted a decade ago, if not so, that anti-Zionism is just a very short jump into anti-Semitism, and that's what we're witnessing. It's not you were. I believe at this event last Tuesday, people were not just called "Oh, you Zionists." People were called "Oh, you Jews." You Jews that supporting Israel. It's nothing to do with you've been political some Zionist ideology. So you're saying, unfortunately, I mean, I don't want to use the word liberal as something of a derogatory term, but for the lack of a better term, if you consider yourself a Bay Area liberal, then automatically you have to be against Israel. That's kind of that's what you witness here coming from Pittsburgh. Now, what about the professors? Do we hear anything from them? Because we imagine that if you want to go outside and get violent and break some glass and be very noisy and loud and in your face, you can only do this in a supportive environment. If the environment is not supportive and conducive to that, students would think twice, three times before they do that. So have you seen any of the professors encouraging it, bringing the conflict into the classroom and so on?
Yeah, we've had actually a few cases of, political indoctrination, so to speak, in classrooms. Actually, one that happened just this week, where a professor, totally unrelated to the Middle East, Israel, Palestine, even history, was lecturing about, this topic and passing out materials and papers and flyers that were, I forget what it was supporting. It might have been BDS, but passing out flyers completely unrelated, talking and lecturing and taking out valuable class time to talk about an issue that, I'm sorry, they're not supposed to be talking about, in whether it's a computer science class, which we had last semester, whether it's an art class, which we had this week, or whether it's just a GSI, which is a graduate student instructor who's offering bonus points for students to go to these pro-Palestine, pro-Hamas rallies. And the case of the bonus points was overturned, but regardless, students should not have to be subjected to these learning environments. A student in computer science class should not be hearing about the conflict through a very biased lens, first of all. But second of all, how does this relate to computer science? That's what I'm genuinely confused about. And the fact that the school isn't stepping in, isn't mitigating, again, their own policies around education and classroom etiquette in these spaces, in these environments. And frankly, I think it's, again, unacceptable.
So first of all, I know that there was a federal investigation, right? There's certain federal rules and laws that every university operates on. They receive also quite a bit of federal funds to operate as well. So there's been a federal government investigation into what's going on in UC Berkeley and some other campuses, I believe. Have you been interviewed by those investigators? Are you aware of it? Are you so, I don't know, you don't have to be involved in it. It's initiated by the government. But if has anyone reached out to you? Has you given your testimony to as an investigation going on?
No, I haven't.
And have you heard anyone else has been so far been talking to the federal investigators?
To my knowledge, no.
No, and we also heard about the lawsuits. I believe there's at least two that I know of. There might be more lawsuits that also brought against the UC Berkeley. Specifically, we'll talk about touch on other campuses as well. Have you heard about those lawsuits? Have you been in touch with the groups?
Yeah, I have.
And I imagine probably given a statement. So at least your experience, your story, everything that you doing as a Jewish student, and as a leader of the Jewish student community, at least your perspective has been at least been made part of the lawsuit. Of right, is some kind of have you submitted some written testimony or affidavit for the lawsuit, or you haven't gotten to that point yet?
I haven't submitted an affidavit, but I'm part of a group of the Brandeis Center, the JAFE, which is a collection of students anonymously that, if there's something relevant to their story, it's submitted. And that's kind of like a larger group effort in terms of the lawsuit that you're referencing.
Yes. So what I want to do next, which is going to be even more disappointing to our viewers, and I'm going to bring in some perspective of what's going on another. We would wish that it would be at least be just limited what you're describing to UC Berkeley campus, but unfortunately, this is not the case. So I would like to share another short video with everyone that to let our viewers know that unfortunately these problems are not just limited to a very famous UC Berkeley, who's been a capital of anti-Israel activity for the last, I don't know, 20, 30, 50 years, for as long as we can remember. So please stay with us.
The kids supposed to feel safe on a campus, and administrators that are telling us to hide ourselves.
Alleging, quote, Jews on campus have been receiving hate emails calling for their gassing and murder.
We have seen an unprecedented spike in harassment, intimidation, hate, and even violence directed at Jewish students.
This UCR Hillel, the only established Jewish organization on campus, was vandalized.
Your students do not feel safe on campus.
Jewish students at UC San Diego and across the UC campuses are having to choose daily whether their safety or their education is more important to them.
The accepted anti-Semitism, hostility, and discrimination is not okay. We're angry and we want to do something about it.
Asking for top-down change. Top-down change from the UC Regents, top-down change from our administration, and top-down change for college campuses across the United States.
So Danielle, I know what we were just showing is a trailer of a documentary that you and your colleagues and your fellow leaders have created after October 7th. If you can tell us a few words about what this trailer is about, what this documentary about, and obviously it sheds light on a tremendous change that's taken place on the entire UC system, one of the best, state systems of universities in the country. So if you can speak to that, please.
Yeah. So back in November, the person that I've been working very closely for leading change, an MBA student, Hannah Schlachter, and I, we decided to take this issue to the UC Regents to really, unveil and share more about this prominent Jewish hate that is spread across UC Berkeley. But what we realized is that it's not secluded to UC Berkeley. And since October 7th, it's erupted at UC Davis, at UC Santa Barbara, and essentially across every single UC and every single campus across the country. Not to say that there aren't some campuses that are doing great, but for majority talk, anti-Semitism has exploded. And so we gathered students at UCLA, where the UC Regents were meeting that month, and we spoke up and we had a press conference and we talked about these deep-seated issues that are found in our individual campuses and how together they create this, really breaking point for Jewish students across the UC system. And what that video and what that trailer kind of captured is that it wasn't secluded to UC Berkeley. It wasn't secluded to UC Davis. And this anti-Semitism is really sweeping the nation and really sweeping the world. So we all in all produced a documentary around 10 minutes long to further unveil, to further show, to further tell the story of what's going on campuses. Because, I think we become very desensitized. We look on the news and, there was there's another riot, another attack on a Jewish student. There was, another Jew murdered simply because he was Jewish. And we become decentralized. We become normalized to all of this Jewish hate. And when did we accept that as a norm? When did we accept this hate and this blatant anti-Semitism as a norm in our lives as Jews and Americans, Jews across the world? And what we hope to really show with this is that, every single one of these incidents has to be taken with the care and the respect and the seriousness that it deserves. It wasn't just UC Berkeley having another riot against Jews. It was, one of the most impactful and serious events against Jews in my entire time on campus. And I think we can't allow ourselves to become decentralized and desensitized to these things.
Thank you, Danielle. We just need to clarify the technical terms. UC Regents, can you clarify for our viewers what that group is, who they are, what are they doing?
Yeah, so the entire UC system is comprised of different universities, whether it's Berkeley, UCLA, UC Barbara, whatever it might be. And the UC regions are kind of that top echelon of, the hierarchy, and they can kind of pass down new bylaws and new rules, or at least ensure that policies are being followed through on a higher level. So our hypothesis with Hannah, whenever we started this initiative, is that, perhaps if we went to the UC regions, we shared how serious this issue was, there would be top-down change. That didn't really happen. Like you saw in the video, there was a 7 million, kind of promise and commitment to universities. Yet now we're 4 or 5 months in, and there's been, again, no change. So the UC Regents, was our hope of that top-down change that would happen. Although even now we're kind of running into an issue of who do we go to next and what do we do next. But again, just to clarify, the UC Regents are kind of the governing body over the UCs.
I get it. So to put it very simply, there's a group of people who are pretty much in charge of everything that's happening on the entire University of California system. Are those people elected? Are they appointed by the governor? I don't believe this is the elected officials. This is the people who are appointed, because obviously the state of California is investing enormous amount of money into the UC system, University of California system, and California State University system. So they appointed, I would imagine appointed, those are the people appointed by the governor or state, some state officials appointed those people to oversee the University of California system. Have you heard from any of the UC regions? Have you heard from them? Have they responded to any of your emails, or was there any or meetings, conversations, anything taking place?
We've spoken to a few who have been receptive, but overall our big push is to have, this roundtable with Jewish student leaders across the UC system and the UC regions. And unfortunately, we haven't seen that come to fruition yet, although, we're hopeful. We still have a few more months in the academic year, and maybe with some pressure and support, we'll hopefully make it happen.
So that's what brings me to the next point. Is I've spoken to you privately about this, and it's very important to articulate it publicly as well. What are we, for example, as a community? We are a community that obviously has a great concern. We are the citizens of California. We're sending our children to the schools. I mean, now obviously it's less and less and less. It becomes quite obvious, but nevertheless, I mean, we are taxpayers. We're the people who are paying, who are paying our taxes for the UC system to exist and to be funded. So what are we as citizens of California, as concerned members of the community, how we can be helpful to a very, very important cause that you are raising?
First of all, I'd say get in touch with the student leaders on campus and figure out what they need, whether it's letters of support, whether it's signing a petition, whether it's writing emails to the administration, whether it's getting in contact with alumni. What we've realized is pressure and media presence, and also donors and alumni, are powerful tools and powerful lanes that we need to, emphasize and really tap into. And the more support that we can get from the community and from, like you said, California citizens that are actually putting their taxpayer dollars into the system, have the right to understand what's going on and the biases, and really be able to tap into that. So I'd say ask those student leaders that you're seeing on national news, what can you do? How can you help? And maybe it's the smallest signature, 2 seconds can actually make a difference in putting that pressure, because I think there is power in numbers, is what we've seen.
Okay, Danielle, for the last part of our interview, of course, we're very curious about your own personal background. Again, I'm have a privilege of being a rabbi and executive director of the Russian-speaking Jewish community. And what I've noticed that on almost every campus, from UCSD to UC Davis, is that as we call them, our kids, our children, are stepping onto the plate in a tremendous show of strength and courage and commitment, and Jewish pride, and we see it at every campus. So I know that there's a secret sauce of why, growing up in a family of ex-Soviet Jews, of immigrants to this country, and that's why I'm curious about your story. Your family immigrated from where? Ukraine, Belarus? Where
From
did
Moscow.
the parents, grandparents?
From Moscow.
Pardon me? From Moscow. So 1990 or in the 80s or in the 90s?
In the 90s.
In the 90s, and came to Pittsburgh. Now, look, it's a former Soviet Union. We all know that it was impossible to practice Judaism. It was very, very hard. to remotely to be steeped or be connected to Jewish culture. But I wonder what is your family's relationship with Israel? I mean, what have you heard growing up? Or tell us a little bit of growing up. Bat mitzvah, you obviously have. Because I spoke to you before. You had the bat mitzvah. You had some Jewish education. Jewish day school, was there a Jewish day school at some point in your story?
I went to Jewish summer camps and I went to Hebrew school on the weekends, but I never went to a day school or, a preliminary Jewish school. I went to a Jewish kindergarten and, I was surrounded by that community, but not a day school environment.
I understand. But again, since you Jewish preschool, you mentioned Hebrew school, Jewish camp. Obviously, your parents have put you into those, enrolled you into those institutions. What do you think drove them to do that? Like, again, you understand my question? Like, they're coming from a place where they never had anything Jewish, never any Jewish exposure, and now they're putting their daughter, who's growing up in America, they're putting her into the Jewish educational institutions. What is their motivation?
The biggest thing for them was making sure that I had a community. And the Jewish community was very important and very, a big player of how I grew up in my upbringing. And that's very different from what my brother experienced, who was actually born in the former Soviet Union. Whenever he came and he was now welcomed to this new life in America where being a Jew, being a practicing Jew was okay. And to this day, we still have very different, perspectives and involvements in the Jewish community. And for me, there was never a question of, my Jewish identity. Like you mentioned, all these different ways that I engaged in the Jewish community and with the Jewish community was always omnipresent. It was always there and it was always available to me. And, it wasn't even a main topic in the house. It wasn't something that we would regularly discuss, but it's something that I quickly fell in love with that aspect of Judaism, the community and the love that it brought, was something that I couldn't get enough of. I loved it. And, the running joke in our house was like, is she going to end up marrying a rabbi one day? Because I would come home and I would just, love it. Like there was seriously nothing I loved more than my memories from summer camp or the memories that I had in Hebrew school. And I remember the first week that I went, we had this program and, it was just basic education on Hebrew, whatever it was. And I got through step 1, like the Aleph program in like a week. And that was unheard of. And I couldn't wait for more. And I was progressing in ways that, people haven't really seen before. And I just loved it. And I loved it so much that, the question was like, what got into this kid? Like, what did we do? And I don't think there was one thing that kind of propelled it, but I think the biggest thing was the community and the Jewish community that my parents really wanted to make sure was present and part of my life.
Before, were you part of the Zionist group? There's a lot of young teen Zionist groups, BBYO, NCSY. Chabad now has a very big active teen group, teen groups, teen activities as well. Or this is something that happened more on campus that you gotten more about.
It wasn't even something that happened on campus. I was never part of these major, youth groups. It was just something that I never, I read the history. I understood the context. There was, like I said, in my community, there was never an anti-Zionist Jew that, that didn't really exist. And again, very different story than whenever I came to Berkeley, but I started to get more involved as I came to Berkeley. And as I shared with you earlier, I started to kind of see these differences in distinct polarizing perspectives of what I had my entire life in Pittsburgh. And then whenever I came to Berkeley, and that's when I really started to step up and get more involved in different student groups and Bears for Israel and Hillel International at Chabad, whatever it might be. And that's when my involvement really grew. And I started to see all these indifferences in the community. I saw all these, for lack of a better word, discrimination. And that's when it really started to strike me and hit me home. I was like, what's going on? And I think that fire only started to fuel itself too. Now I'm finding myself on national news talking about it. And like you said, nobody wants to be known as, the person on national news talking about anti-Semitism and how bad it's gone on a campus. But I think it comes from a place of, if we don't do it, if this generation of Jews doesn't do it, who will? And where are we going to find ourselves in the next 2, 3, 5, 10 years? And if we just continue to let this, rampant normalization of anti-Semitism run free, like, are we going to find ourselves in another Soviet Union situation? And I think that's really what's continuing to fuel my work in this.
Have your parents told you about their experience in the Soviet Union? Have they shared with you? Because I as a rabbi always sermonize about the importance of telling children and grandchildren what we had to experience, why we had to escape, why we're here in the first place. So
yeah.
they did tell you.
Those are the stories that I grew up hearing. Those are, the memories that I remember. And I reflect on those now, and I find myself in very similar positions. So I think that similarity and that connection, despite countless decades that have passed, whether it's stories that have been told by my grandparents or even great-great-grandparents that, experienced this anti-Semitism that was so deep-rooted and normalized, I'm now looking at my own life and the experiences that I've had, and I'm like, what's going on? Why are these apples to apples comparisons still relevant today in 2024?
So one more personal question, because I know usually the makeup of the family. I mean, I know I've raised some of those. I've educated and taught some of those teenagers and preteens who are now active on campus, who are very, who our community is very, very proud of. Their leaders on various campuses. So usually it's the mama who's concerned and scared, who's telling the daughter, son, no, don't go anywhere, don't get involved in this, be safe. And Papa is like, yeah, we're very proud of you, stay tall. Is this the makeup of your family?
No, so my dad's actually the one who's really terrified for me. And, since things have escalated, it's now both my parents and my brother who are very, very concerned for me. But it was always my dad who was more reluctant and, the one that was kind of, be careful, be calm, don't get involved. You
Take
don't
it
have to.
easy.
Exactly. And my mom was like, listen, like, if you want to do it, just be safe, be smart. So a little bit different, but you have to have one parent in at least one of those roles.
Right. Who's like, but again, the pride, that you're doing this. Like, again, the perspective is, well, the country we came from, we were completely powerless. You come and you speak up at the. I went to college, to university back in former Soviet Union. Like, you speak out, you get expelled, you get kicked out, and that's the end of the story. You go to synagogue and you can lose your job. So we felt very, very powerless. We, meaning the community of ex-Soviet immigrants. Here, that's what a lot of us feel. Like, why did we come to this country in the first place? If we're going to be quiet again, and that this is the country that has laws. There's a protection in the workplace. There's protection in education. You can be a proud Jew. You can wear a Star of David. You don't have to hide who you are. So of course it gives us tremendous pride, us as a community, that we have our young people who are leading this fight today, who are leading this charge. And tell us the last question, talking about the Jewish pride and the Jewish life. How is the Jew? We know there's a very negative negative element to Jewish life on campus today. But again, at UC Berkeley, how is the Jewish life? Like, if the student wants to find other Jewish friends and Jewish community, is it available? Is it there?
Yeah, and I have to say, the thing that's gotten me through my time at UC Berkeley is the Jewish community, is, the Jewish life and the Jewish joy that is so present and so prominent on campus. And once you enter the community, at least for me, I can't leave. Those are my best friends, the people that I've grown the closest with. And since October 7th, these have become my best friends. The people that we've really struggled. We were in the, lowest of lows. I mean, as you can imagine, after October 7th. And I don't think I would have gotten through this without them and without the Jewish community, without Berkeley Chabad, without Shabbat dinners, without whatever it might have been. I wouldn't, despite the fact that it's a very difficult campus to be an outspoken Zionist, there's always a Jewish community, always a Shabbat dinner, always a Taco Tuesday, whatever it might be, countless events and countless groups. You have Students Supporting Israel, Tikva, Bears for Israel, a multitude of pro-Israel groups on campus that are loud and strong and not backing down or going away anytime soon.
Danielle, thank you so much for giving us your time. I know you're flying to East Coast. You're speaking at the ADL conference, Anti-Defamation League conference, or something of that sort. Thank you for giving us your time. I really, really hope and that it's not the last time that we meet. We're looking forward to welcome you in our center in San Francisco. We want to show the documentary that you put together, and we're going to be us as a community will be very, very helpful and getting involved in trying to rein in this outrageous situation. We have our local officials that we're in contact with, politicians that are asking us for their vote, for our vote and support. So this is not the end. This is the beginning of something that. And again, I want to be on state publicly that the Russian-speaking Jewish community here in the Bay Area, whatever the students need, the leaders, the individual members, if there's anything that we could be supportive and could be of help and encouragement, will be there 100%. Thank you, Danielle, so much. It was very nice to meet you, and it will continue. It will continue, and we're very, very proud of you, and we are praying for you to be safe and for you to continue to stand tall.
Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. All the best.